Welcome to episode 8 of Conservation Travel with Roger Smith, brought to you by Australian Geographic Travel. My name's Eliza, and today we're in for an extra special extended episode of the series focusing on international efforts to reduce carbon emissions and keep travel sustainable. Roger is talking with CEO of Sustainable Travel International, Paloma Zapata. This is a remarkable opportunity to hear how sustainable travel works on a global level. Paloma has 20 years of professional experience in the industry and has deployed major sustainable tourism and economic advancement projects in over 30 countries. Her personal journey is incredibly fascinating, so without further ado, let's hear all about it.
Welcome, Paloma. It's wonderful to have you here. You're in Barcelona, I think.
Yes, I live in Barcelona. I've been living here for better half of 19 years.
Yeah, what a wonderful place. I'm heading over in your direction early next year, I hope. And we're going to go to Portugal and Spain and France and have a look around those places. So I'm looking forward to it. But look, it's great to have you here, Paloma. It's just been wonderful to work with Sustainable Travel International as we have been doing over the last year or so with your team. And I thought as part of our major launch that we're going to be doing with our new project to do with climate action and sustainability, I thought it'd be wonderful to talk to you. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Roger. It's lovely to be here with you. And when you come to Barcelona, make sure you call me and we can have a glass of wine.
Oh, that sounds perfect. I love that. Thank you so much. I just want to know a little bit about you, first of all, where you came from and where you are now. I mean, now you head up an international organisation that's helping tourism operators around the world become more sustainable and climate conscious. Tell me where it all started.
Originally, I was actually born in Detroit or near Detroit in Michigan, but my family is originally from the Dominican Republic. So, I feel and I'm an island girl. So I actually grew up half of my childhood there and my extended family is there. So the Dominican Republic is a beautiful island with beautiful beaches and scenery and lush, environments and gorgeous people as well. So when I was growing up, it wasn't very much discovered yet as a destination. It was not very well known. And then it actually exploded with tourism. And, I really saw how tourism was alienating people, how it was like destroying environments. And people that would go there were really not even really seeing the country. They was in these like resort-like, environments, not really getting to know the country. So I felt that there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way to do tourism that, is more sustainable, right? So that's like when I got really inspired. I was in industrial and systems engineering working for IBM. I was making microchips, which was very intellectually, challenging, but it wasn't really, a calling that I felt that I was doing something really important, for the world. So that's when I decided to go back to school. I got my master's, I got an MBA and a postgraduate in tourism management. And I pivot to tourism and specifically interested in sustainable tourism. So that's kind of like my inspiration, going into this field.
And Paloma, with that, what did you see? What did you notice?
Yeah, so I was working in New York and I would go back every year. I pilgrim, I still do. Every Christmas for me, white Christmas means white sandy beach, with a beautiful sea.
Lucky you.
Exactly. So that's to me. So I would go back and I still do go back every year. And every year I would just like see more and more development. I would go back to those pristine beaches that I used to know and they would be like hotel plop there. There would be, a mangrove clearing. There would just be a lot more development and a lot more alienation. So I didn't exactly see, more economic development. I could maybe see even more poverty and more, ecological sort of like devastation. And that's when I thought there has to be a better way to do tourism. It's a beautiful place. I would love for it to be continually discovered and enjoyed. But there's got to be a better way of doing it.
That's such an inspiring story, Paloma, because you've seen it happen right in front of your eyes, and you actually saw developments being built in the mangroves.
Yeah, no, I've seen mangroves being cleared. for development. Absolutely. I've seen an entire buffer zone, for example, between a village, like a fisherman village, and then there's a buffer zone that's and then the beach, beautiful pristine beach. I've seen that completely destroyed, and then just a hotel being plopped, and then like just a wall, so that or a wall around it, and then the village in the back with no more sea breeze, with no access, with no jobs, even, and then no more access to the beach. So I've seen that, with my own eyes.
But there's another aspect to it that I suddenly thought of while you were talking. That also has a lot to do with what sustainable travel is doing in regards to over tourism. You've actually seen it happen right in front of your face.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, going back to the mangrove ecosystem, it is so important for so many different, ways. So, for example, the mangrove is a buffer zone. It protects the shoreline from storms coming in. You see how you're getting bigger and stronger storms, so you really are being exposed when you don't have that protective barrier. They are also the cradle of fish, because that's where fish, that's where they grow. That's where you have like the little fishies, and that's really supporting the reef ecosystem. So the most important ecosystem in these type of areas is, you have the mangrove, seagrass, and then reef, and all of that is a protective area, a protected coastal zone, as well as a nursery for the fish. So it's food security. It also holds the sand that creates beaches. So it's also, important for the local economy, even, to actually have the beautiful beaches that you need in order to have this sun and beach experience. And then finally, it's a carbon sink. It's a carbon deposit. It actually deposits 10 times more carbon than a regular forest ecosystem on land. So it's a super ecosystem, and is super important to protect. And traditionally, inadvertently, because it's not that development wanted to destroy these ecosystems, because of it's just they've been doing it, and in a very rapid pace, for development, but without the knowledge of how important these ecosystems are.
It's a very important component of what Sustainable Travel International tries to help tourism with, how you deal with over tourism. And maybe why don't we just have a quick talk about what over tourism is?
Yeah, so it's like, you call over tourism or over love destination. So that's a destination that is experiencing a volume of tourism that is creating more negative, let's say, impact than positive impact, right? So it's just, beyond the threshold that it could either withstand on an environmental level, or even on a social level, or even an economic level. So it's an imbalance when it comes to tourism. Now, what's important to note is that um, there's no magic number as far as like how many tourists a destination can have or not have. It's all about management. It's all about having system readiness in a destination. So one of the approaches that we've developed specifically is carrying capacity studies in an island context. So I've done these in already 4 destinations. I just completed the carrying capacity study for the island of Curacao, and I've done that as well for the Seychelles, for 3 islands there, for Aruba, and for Bonaire. So these islands were in very different sort of positions in their growth. Either they're like starting growth in a very rapid pace, or they're like in a declining mode. They have very different aspects of how they were growing. But the realities were that the tourism was exacerbating some of these, let's say, what we call indicators, which could be the environment, like we were talking about mangroves, depleting the mangroves, or the society wasn't experiencing tourism in a positive way. So it was like alienating them, or it was creating an environment that is not well-being. It's not a community well-being. Or the infrastructure, for example, water, electricity, road networks, all of these things were being exacerbated by the volume of tourism that was coming. And then when you have the economics part of it, then it's not really a providing the income that it should be providing. So there's an imbalance, in over tourism.
Before we go any further, let's just talk briefly about what Sustainable Travel International's objectives are. What are you aiming to do? And before we do that, or as you run into that, Paloma, did you start Sustainable Travel International?
It was actually Brian Mullis who actually founded Sustainable Travel International. He was inspired by the Year of Ecotourism back in 2002, 2003. And he was a tour operator, and he saw the need to support tourism operators in this journey. And so he was inspired to create Sustainable Travel International. And I joined Sustainable Travel in 2015. So actually 10 years ago. And, very, early on in those years, he actually moved on, to do other things. And it just kind of like, became a perfect, opportunity, for me to continue working on what I'm passionate about. So our vision is that tourism can be a vessel for economic development and for environmental conservation. So we believe that tourism can support, these ideals, but done incorrectly, it can actually devastate, economies or communities and the environment. So that's the premise where we like to work in. We want to be the support for the tourism industry towards that goal. So towards sustainable development. And so how we do that is through these mechanisms or these solutions, like we were talking about, over tourism carrying capacity studies. Now we're working very much on supporting the industry through the climate crisis. So that's really, working through the climate crisis, working through, waste and plastic reductions, community, development, governance. So all these different, areas, we support the tourism industry, in that journey, believing that it can be a support for, positive impacts.
That's one of the reasons why we came to, because you've had the experience working in the travel industry. Sustainable Travel has that experience, and it's been valuable to us, I've got to tell you. Invaluable is probably a better way of putting it. One of the things that we've sort of decided during our year working with you, we've decided to focus on a term that we call travel for nature. It was one of those things I thought up at around about 2:00 in the morning. I'm trying to think, how do we keep this short but purposeful? And I wanted in doing that to try and bring some, I didn't want to just talk about climate change, because that's incredibly important, and we're going to talk about that shortly. But I wanted to talk about some of the key priorities to do with many people in the industry at the moment in the sustainability area, which is collaborating globally and coming up with other techniques of helping our guests feel like they're giving back. And we could go on about that at length, but it's such an important issue about giving back, and whether people choose tours to give back or whether they're looking for that sort of tourism or not. Let's have a chat about that. Do you think people are buying tours because they are sustainable, or they're published as being sustainable or promoted as being sustainable?
Well, the statistics does tell us that, people are more aware of the climate crisis, of all of these, the plastic crisis, of, people are tending to be more aware. So now, are they making the choice? I think there's a lot of, let's say, a maybe misconception or lack of information. They really want to do good. They don't know how to. So there's a lot of, again, not enough information out there as to how to choose the most sustainable, the most appropriate opportunity or experience, right? That is going to be, a positive experience, for where they're going. So I think there's still that gap, at the moment that, we can, as an industry, it's the moment to really start communicating those impacts correctly so that people can make those choices. So there is definitely a tendency, to want to do good when they when they travel.
I interviewed a woman called Penny Rafferty, and she's been working in Australia with the Australian tourism industry to help them move forward in this way as well. What she basically feels is that people mainly focus on, particularly in Australia, nature and culture. But she has also, like me, noticed that the industry over the last 4, 5, 6 years has moved from finding it difficult to sell that, to market that, to actually having people beginning to come in and ask for it. But it's just the way that it's promoted. You don't shove it down their throats. You say, these are ways that you can improve your travel by giving back.
Yeah, actually, our previous or our last webinar that we had, sustainable travel, we were specifically talking about how to, make the sustainable experience, the default, how to create that to be like the positive experience, to be like the center of the experience without actually even having to name it that this is sustainable or eco, but it's just like the best experience. So we had, different representations, of different of a destination, of a small tour operator, of a larger tour operator, talking about, how they've created the product, how they created, let's say, climate friendly products that were actually an enhancement of, the experience, whether it be because something local and something amazing that you're trying new, whether it being you're going through slow travel through cycling through a paddy field, for example, and just like enjoying the nature, but also being a sustainable transportation option. So there's like the endless ways that the tourism industry can really incorporate these values and making actually the better experience.
I've noticed that people are starting to do it. And of course, travel advisors are a little bit reticent to bring these matters up in front of their clients. But it's interesting if you do it in a way where just imagine how you're going to feel if you go there and do that, whatever it might be, and how enjoyable it's going to be. One of the things that we need to talk about, of course, is climate action. I saw a survey that was done a little while ago because I do quite a bit of writing, and there was some research done by Bonn University, and I think the United Nations was involved in this as well, where 87% of people believe that governments aren't doing enough to protect them from environmental degradation, particularly climate change. And the point of the research was, and it's fascinating the point of the research was that people, when you say get a room of 100 people, and if you walked in there and said, put up your hand if you're concerned about what your government's doing about climate change, about 10 of the people would put their hand up. But if you had a little bit of paper that they could write on to vote, around about 87% would have put their hand up if they thought the other people would agree with them. And isn't that fascinating? I mean, people do want to see change, but they don't want to have it shoved in their face.
Absolutely. And they shouldn't have, because it's not about flight shaming. It's not about like, making you feel guilty about what you're doing. It's completely the opposite, right? It's really just incorporating. It should be the default, right? So then again, I think the burden should be distributed, across, the different stakeholders. I think the government has their role, making sure that when they build infrastructure that is sustainable, the operations also have their role of making, the actual entire operation, again, the most sustainable, the most eco-friendly, and as well the best experience. And then the tourists themselves, they also have their own responsibility in how they choose what they bring, how they sort their waste as well. You know what I mean? Everybody has a responsibility, but it should not fall on just one actor. So I think it's wrong to go with that flight shaming and just putting everything, even the tour operators, they should not put the burden on the end consumer. They should do their part and communicate what they're doing, and then the tourists will flock to them because they're looking for it.
It's actually really interesting to me because when we were working with Daniel from Sustainable Travel International, looking at how we were going to deal with our offsets. Now, let's talk about flight shaming now. But and I said to Daniel, there's something happening here. I cannot get rid of flight. You and I both know this is one of the biggest issues in the industry. People need to get to places, and the easiest way they can do it is flying. And of course, there's other ways of doing it. But here in Australia, the only way that someone from the US or from Barcelona can get here is either walking or maybe a ship. But
It's going to take a few years.
yeah, and it would take a long time. So, and I'll never forget Daniel saying to me, Roger, I understand the problem and I agree with you entirely, and I would love it to all be wonderful, and the fuels that aircraft use wouldn't put CO2 into the atmosphere. But he said, as long as when people get to you, to your destination, they do something of value, which is actually helping the local people or giving back in some way or another. And that's one of the reasons why with us, we've got a special program called Conservation Travel, which has got a lot of citizen science involved in it, and we share that with the world. And I think that's the way we need to look at it, which brings us to carbon offsetting. And that's one of the things that sustainable travel does, amongst a whole range of other things. And I think it's really important that people understand that, is it's not just about carbon offsetting with sustainable travel. It's about a whole raft of different things that a travel operator does. But to do with offsetting, one of the things that occurred to me on the journey I was doing with your people was that if you do offset a flight, you may not even be going to the destination where the offset is occurring. Can you sort of speak to that, how that all comes together? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this are trying to understand how that works.
Absolutely. So, I mean, climate crisis is a global crisis, right? So it doesn't happen in just one place in the earth. It's affecting all of us globally. So it doesn't really, you don't have to support just the one destination. You support this in a global scale. So our portfolio has projects all over the world in all different geographies where it's needed the most. So these carbon projects have a merit in their own right. They are supporting, for example, at-risk indigenous communities in certain places that are mostly affected by climate change and is, for example, devastating important ecosystems like we were talking about, mangroves. Again, these are important for humanity, for the rest of the world. So if you're doing an action, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the place that you're going, because this is different than just charity. This is not just about, which has its own merit when you actually do, charity and supporting, regenerative, tourism in a certain destination and supporting communities. That is, another mechanism. But we're talking about, the voluntary carbon market, which is again global, and it's for a very important cause, which is to tackle, climate action and the climate crisis. So again, this is a global, concept. And when you're traveling, no matter where you're traveling to, you can support any project in any part of the world that is, again, supporting, this particular mechanism.
That's one of the things that I love about what you do. You've got 7 projects now across the globe. And one of them was in Cambodia, Kiosima. And one of the things I've had a look at some of the videos from there about not only are we offsetting our carbon, in other words, in that area the forests are being protected, so they're not being cut down, and in many cases they're being replaced. But it's also supporting the local community in many different ways. But one of the most powerful ways it's supporting community is empowering women to stand up and be leaders in the community, which they haven't been for some time. So that's just another interesting side to it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's supporting, indigenous communities in land rights, which is, very important, to give them a voice. So, one of the important things about this particular mechanism, these communities will not have access to the international, finance if it wasn't for carbon. And that's one of the pillars of carbon offsetting, mechanism, is that this particular project would not exist if it wasn't for that finance. And so we're giving them opportunity to be able to access international finance through this mechanism. So that's what really needs to be, understood, that without it, again, they just wouldn't have any visibility. So again, it doesn't matter where you're traveling to, if as long as you're supporting high quality projects, because not all projects are created equal, but high quality projects, that resonates with also, what you want to support is also important, that, you understand the projects that you're supporting and the reasons why you're supporting, and they resonate with you as a person.
And I've tried to develop that concept, which you guys have helped me with, by using the word ethical. They're ethical offsets. It's multi-layered, and I think people need to appreciate this when they travel, is that when you buy offsets such as what you offer, you're offering people much more than just a carbon reduction scheme. It's a whole community-based scheme, and in our case, and we primarily deal with wildlife here in Australia, there's a number of projects which are involved with, say, with Kiosema, which are to do with elephants and gibbons. And I think also there's a tourism component of it over there as well, where they're they're asking people to come there and learn about what they're doing to protect the forest, but also the things that live in it.
What's, really beautiful is that during the pandemic, let's say tourism was supporting the elephant sanctuary there. And they themselves then were supporting the Kelsemia project. So actually, during the pandemic, when they didn't have any tourists, it was the project, it was the carbon mechanism that was supporting the the elephant sanctuary. No, so it's such an important mechanism that has real results, down, on the ground. And yes, this particular forest is just magical in Cambodia in itself. It's a magical place, that it's just so worth, supporting as a destination. But again, this is just beyond just being, a destination. It should be a world cause, to support these type of, at risk ecosystems and areas. I just want to, talk about, you mentioned that we have 7 projects, and I think it's important to note, our portfolio approach. So when you come to Sustainable Travel International and you offset, every dollar is going to be split amongst this portfolio. And it's the portfolio that is across the world. And the components are about 40% will be forestry projects. And they could be anywhere. Right now, we have the Kelsemia, we have the Dieta Valley project supporting also the indigenous, one of the last communities that are nomadic communities, also support them in their land rights and their own ecosystems that they have there. Then we have renewable energies supporting the transition, across the world. And this project, we have a wind project in Morocco, another project in the India highlands, supporting also the Garo communities, indigenous communities from the region in cookstoves, which is supporting the reduction of having to cut trees, and so more efficient, healthier ways of cooking as well, in areas that would never been reached if it wasn't for this project.
I've found that fascinating, Paloma. The whole idea of a cooking stove, a lot of people may not realise that, but to cook the food, you would have used a whole heap of wood, and now this cook stove reduces it by what, about 90%, I think. Is it something like that?
It reduces greatly, and it's cleaner, and it's healthier, it's more efficient, and it's just bringing science, all the way up to areas that are very remote. And you can also visit them. You can participate in actually going to this absolutely beautiful region, as well as even volunteering to support, bringing the cook stoves or electrifying these villages. Just to complete, we have another 20% that goes for blue carbon ecosystems. Again, those very important ecosystems. They're also supporting, for example, the one in Indonesia, Rimbaraya. It's an area where you have orangutans, and so it's protecting their environment. And then finally, we have innovation. So innovation is super important, because it's supporting projects that are in their starting point. It's supporting also new technologies and in carbon removals. So using nature-based, carbon removals, or technological, carbon removals, which is important for the future. Because even if you take out all the carbon, emissions, today, there's a lot of carbon already existing, in the air that we've produced that is going to continuously, exacerbate climate change. So supporting these initiatives is also super important so that we can accelerate the carbon removal in the air.
Just listening to you talk, it's so inspiring, Paloma. It really is. We could talk for a very long time. We've got a few minutes left. I just wanted to say briefly, too, that I know that you've got a new project in Venice where you're recovering wetlands in Venice. And people might think, well, Venice is fine. Why do they need to recover wetlands over there? Well, there's a lot of birds that use those wetlands and they're incredibly significant. And I want to congratulate you on that new project. I can't imagine the effort that went into creating it. But people can read about all of this on Sustainable Travel International's website. And by the way, it's a very, very good website. There's lots and lots of information. Look, we've only got a few minutes left, Paloma. We're in wildlife tourism and often my guests are in Australia, and I often ask them what's their favourite Australian animal. I know you've travelled quite a bit, so I'm not going to fit you into Australia, but what is your favourite animal wild animal in the world?
First, elephants. I am just like, elephants are just so majestic and just so beautiful and smart. And I'm fascinated, by elephants. I love snakes. I know people think that they're scared of snakes, but I love snakes. They're slick and they're beautiful, and they just, I think for me, it's symbolic as well. The shedding of the skin and everything. So I like them. And then when it comes to the water world, dolphins. They're just so smart, and they're just beautiful. My first dive ever in the world, I went down and a school of dolphin just went in front of me. So I was, forever, grateful for that experience. And so I love dolphins. They seem like such a majestic and smart. There was one that just came back and just looked at us straight in the eye, so that to me. And then finally, the sea lions. When I was working in the Galapagos and I went swimming, and they're so playful. They're so beautiful. They're like little pets. They're like, little dogs of the sea. So I love sea lions as well. So I can't pin one down.
Paloma, it's been absolutely wonderful. I know we could talk a lot more. But before we go, I just wanted to thank you for everything that you're doing for Australian Geographic Travel and for Echidna Walkabout that I represent. The work that your team has put in with us over the last year has been amazing. Your patience with us has been extraordinary. I know we're a little fish in the huge sea that you operate in, but you've treated us like we were number one. I want to thank you for that. And please keep up the fantastic work. We're here to support you. And I know you're here to support us. Thank you so much, Paloma. And hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you in Barcelona next year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Roger.
What a journey. After realizing the impact that tourism was having on her Caribbean island home of the Dominican Republic, Paloma moved her career to work with Sustainable Travel International and change how tourism is affecting the planet on a global level. I think we can all learn a lesson or two from her determination. If you'd like to learn more about Sustainable Travel International, here's the link to their website. In our next episode, we'll be heading back to Australia to hear from a tour operator who is actively working to protect native fish on the Murray River. Tony Charlie's love of rivers and wetlands inspired his transition from environmental science to ecotourism. He grew up on the Murray River and now guides tours on and around the river for his company, Murray River Trails. We'll hear all about how Tony set up a special fund that is helping create fish hotels along the Murray River to protect the vulnerable Murray cod. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Conservation Travel with Roger Smith, brought to you by Australian Geographic Travel. To see all previous episodes, head to the Australian Geographic YouTube channel and search Conservation Travel with Roger Smith. See you next time.